Okay, good evening and hello, and welcome to the second event, the second paracuratorial event within the exhibition called the Entangled. Welcome, Duško. Thanks for agreeing to meet us. I would like to start in a less conventional manner. This is one of your publications, one of the publications from your publishing house, and basically in this book you raise some questions about how to act in the art world. So an anonymous source replied to the question. The question was, what are the rules of etiquette for the art world? And the answer was, keep it cool, try not to get too excited, and it makes people uncomfortable. So I'm gonna try to keep it cool. And the other answer was, introduce yourself and those around you. So my name is Maja Ćirić, you're Duško Petrović. Here we have a couple of free people from the Association of the Artists in Serbia, and I hope many more will join us through the other channels. So on a more formal note, I'm going to read a little note from your biography because it is much more extensive. So Duško Petrović is a co-founder of Paper Monument, where he has published numerous critically acclaimed and best-selling books, including Draw It to Your Eyes Closed, The Art of the Art Assignment, Social Medium, Artist Writing, 2000-2015, and As Radical, As Mother, As Salad, As Shelter, What Should Art Institutions Do Now? Petrović has produced Adjunct Computer Weekly and the Daily Gentrifier under his personal imprint DME. He has written about art and visual culture for many publications, including N+1, Book Forum, Art in America, Art News, and the New York Times. His work has been exhibited at galleries and museums nationally and internationally. Having previously taught at Boston University, Yale University, and the Rhode Island School of Design, Petrović currently chairs in the New Arts Journalism Department at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So Duško, welcome. The floor is yours. The proverbial floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Maya, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure on a personal level to present my work to the community in Belgrade because a lot of my family actually lives in Belgrade, but I didn't meet them until about 4 years ago because it's a long story. But so it's really a pleasure to. This is my first professional visit to Belgrade. I've been to Belgrade twice, just on a family kind of level, but this is really nice. And yeah, I'm going to just share my work in a general way, and then hopefully answer whatever questions you have. I'm always most interested in talking about what you want to talk about. So the slideshow will just be a kind of introduction. I'm going to talk about two publishing projects. One is Paper Monument, which I do together with Roger White, and we've done it since I think 2007. And then the second one is DME, which is my personal publishing house. So it's kind of the band and then the solo project. So I'm going to talk about that. And the kind of intellectual rubric I'm using is this title, to make public, to make a public. It's kind of an awkward title, but it comes from, in English, publish means to make public. So obviously everybody talks about that. When you publish something, you're making it public. And then the more I did that, the more I made things public, the more I realized that that wasn't exactly what I was interested in. I was more interested in making a public, and this was a distinction I learned to make from hearing Martha Rosler make it, the American artist Martha Rosler. And she distinguishes between an audience, a mere audience, you could say, and a public, in the sense that an audience is sort of a passive receiver of culture or art, fans, things like that. But a public is a group of people that somehow is ready to take action or act as a group. So a lot of my projects I realized have to do with sort of using publishing to make this group formation happen and to have the people who read the book be more prepared to be in the world, I guess. So that's the kind of overarching theme. And now I'll share my screen. Let's see here. You can see that, I hope. Yeah. So on the left, we have the most recent paper monument book, As Radical as Mother, As Salad as Shelter, What Should Art Institutions Do Now? And then on the right, a couple of editions of The Daily Gentrifier from Columbus. So I'm going to talk about paper monument first. I mentioned I started it with Roger White in 2007. It really came out of working with N+1 as an art critic, which I did initially just because my friend Mark Greif asked me. But as soon as I started doing it, I really enjoyed the kind of social, collaborative aspect of publishing and editing. So we started out with the journal, which you can see at the top. There are the numbered journals. And our basic idea at the time was that, I guess we had two ideas. One was that there was academic publishing and commercial publishing, and those are fine, but we realized that there was a big space in between that wasn't happening, so in the US. So that was sort of where we wanted to operate, neither in a scholarly way nor in a way that was entirely connected to, the cycles of gallery shows and commercial enterprises. So that was one idea. The other idea was that, we wanted to have a specific relationship to the internet and to the digital era. And we sort of realized publishing was going to be changing, obviously, because of the internet. And the title Paper Monument sort of reflects our decision to slow things down and to use paper publishing as a way to be more reflective during that time. I guess the third idea I should add, which is maybe the most important, was that was another part of Paper Monument, was to take things that we felt were talked about in the art world, but not printed about in the art world. So that's kind of the idea of the Paper Monument, was that we would sort of monumentalize or, make more permanent these discussions that we had been hearing in the art world. And the first book project that we sort of used that idea for was the one that Maya started by quoting, "I like your work, art and etiquette." And I guess, it's a funny book. It's, we were trying to be funny. We were trying to be light, but we were also trying to use this kind of minor thing of etiquette to get to some bigger questions about power and inclusion and sort of, how the whole art world is structured, which, as artists, it can often be really confusing. And our conclusion, I think, was that it's often intentionally confusing. It's set up in a way to exclude people. Nobody ever talks about the rules, because if you talk about the rules, they're not as powerful anymore. So we wanted to do just that and talk about the rules, talk about all the secret ways that people do things, to kind of break things open and make people think about why they were doing that. But it's also like a toilet book. Everyone always talks about it as a toilet book because you read it, just whenever you're not reading something else. And that book was kind of an experiment. We didn't know if it would succeed. We made Paper Monument just with our own money, a little bit of money, and some subscribers that believed in us. So I think that book cost about $1,000 to publish the first 1,000 copies. And then we were just going to see what happened. And what happened was it was very popular. It was a big success. So it was selling copies. So then we had more money and we decided to make a second book, which was the middle one there, Draw It With Your Eyes Closed, where we used kind of a similar approach, which was to take one seemingly small thing and use it as a kind of entry point into a bigger topic. So in this case, it was using the art assignment as a way of looking at art pedagogy just generally, because we realized in art school, the main thing that you do is you just give an assignment, right? So the title is a kind of imaginary assignment that no one ever gives, or we didn't know of anyone giving it, but it sounds like the kind of thing they tell you to do in art school, which is to draw it with your eyes closed. You know, there's always like a kind of trick and a kind of surprising solution and that stuff. So that was kind of our effort, again, to open up art education and make these things available also to everyone, not just like if you were John Baltasari's student, but everyone could get these assignments and trade them and do variations on them. So it was a kind of open sourcing of art school, you know, was how we came to think of it. And then just to say briefly, yeah, we did, after that, we did Social Medium, which was a collection. We really felt like the digital era produced a new kinds of art writing, and we wanted to make that accessible. Artists were participating in publishing in ways that they hadn't before, just because the internet made so many different things possible. So that was kind of our greatest hits collection of artist writings that we did in 2015. And then the last one, As Radical, we put out after the election, basically, in the US. You know, it really, now it feels a little bit better because of the 2020 election, but right after the 2016 election was kind of a shock. And the way we decided to address it was to talk about institutional, you know, behavior, basically. So that's a sort of the most American book that we did, because it's very focused on the setup in the United States. But that's just kind of a quick overview there of Paper Monument. And, you know, obviously, like, part of this kind of public formation is this editorial decision to bring certain contributors together and make them into a kind of group, you know, which all kind of anthologies and edited collections do that, but we really take a very active approach to this and bring all the writers in and have a lot of events afterwards. So we're trying to build kind of a discussion or a discourse around whatever the book is about. You know, again, I think that's what all good publishers try to do, but we really tried to do that in a very kind of open way within the art world. And one of our main tools for building a public is the questionnaire, which it sounds sort of simple, but we decided that basically there were too many interviews in the art world and not enough questionnaires. And the difference is really just that an interview is directed at one person, whereas a questionnaire is directed at many people. And again, that sounds just simple, and it is just simple, but the questionnaire puts into your mind the idea that other people are answering the same question and other people are thinking about the same question. So we found this to be a really exciting and useful tool in the art world to kind of say, like, we're asking everybody this, what do you think? And it creates a different kind of answer than I'm only asking you this question. So these were some of the questions that we had for As Radical. And we were pointing to a shift that we saw, which was that a lot of arts institutions in the US, which previously had been kind of, you know, fake neutral or whatever, had suddenly decided that they had a political position and were trying to articulate that political position, oftentimes awkwardly. And so these are some of the other questions that we wanted to ask. And again, you know, they're not neutral questions. In a way, we were trying to push institutions in the US to work through these questions faster and develop a kind of approach for the ongoing problems that we have politically in the US. So, you know, and again, these, especially the last one, where we're asking what other institutions do you look to? This is again part of this ethic of public formation, like talk about other people, recognize other people, and acknowledge that it's a group problem. Yeah, just to give you some more samples of the questions. And then we always like to end with a kind of open one. I remember when Fred Astaire, the famous dancer, died, I heard on the radio Tommy Tune, another very famous dancer, eulogizing him, and he just said, you know, Fred gave me the best dance advice ever. He just said to me one time, after he saw one of my shows, he just said, Tommy, dance better. So I always love that, like, just be better, you know. So obviously, like, a big part of what we do with Paper Monument is the book, and then the book is a kind of excuse to build, you know, various kinds of relationships, public events, speaking tours. And we do these in a kind of, again, kind of open source or family style way, where a lot of our different contributors around the country will just have events or coordinate events with us around the book and bring more people together and more people into the conversation. So we found that to be very useful. We do, like, in, you know, in the pre-pandemic times, New York Art Book Fair, LA Art Book Fair, Chicago Art Book Fair, Canada, Mexico, London, wherever, Berlin, wherever we can go, we do events. The top one is actually me in Warsaw. So, you know, I did some events in Warsaw when I was there. And the bottom left photo is a photo of the books for sale at one of the book fairs, which I don't know what the situation is in Serbia, but in the US, the book fairs have been a really useful, less commercial or differently commercial site for the art world. You know, I always prefer it because it's like you can buy things for $10 rather than $10,000, you know, so it's just different kind of people there. So we really, you know, we love going to the book fairs and talking to people. And again, that it sounds stupid, but that's part of the book, is like selling the book, talking to people about what they thought about the book, telling them about a new book, having another conversation. Like, we're always kind of working in that way, using those events as editors. So it's part of how I think. So that was a really fast, like, you know, summary of, I guess, 14 years or 13 years of Paper Monument, but we can come back to anything if you want. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about DME. And this is kind of the whole fleet of DME projects. Some of them are in progress, some of them are for the future, and some of them have already been done. As Maya mentioned, I did Adjunct Commuter Weekly, which was a lifestyle magazine for adjunct professors. I don't know what the term in Serbia is, but pardon me, in the US, they use this term adjunct basically for people that are taught per course rather than a salary. And, you know, the short version of it is that in the US in the 1970s, most university professors were tenured or tenure track professors with a salary, health insurance, stability, everything like that. And then over the last few decades, that whole system has been basically destroyed. And a lot of, the majority of courses now are taught by adjuncts who are taught per course, very, very low rates. So I think the average rates put you at the poverty line, which is really crazy for people who have PhDs and everything like that. So what ends up happening, and what happened to me for 10 years, was that you travel around to various different schools, teaching, you know, one class here, two classes there, and trying to collect enough money to live. And so in the process of doing that, in desperation, really, I created Adjunct Commuter Weekly, which again was kind of imagining a community that wasn't identifying itself as such, and using, and with DME, I use more humor more directly. So the idea was that, you know, we had this lifestyle magazine because it was such an interesting lifestyle. And so it's this kind of dark humor around the adjunct situation. And then Adjunct Commuter Weekly, of course, collapsed after 1 week because none of the adjuncts had enough time and energy to keep going. And then I formed ACW, which was the online platform for Adjunct Commuter Weekly, which is still there, adjunctcommuterweekly.com, if anyone wants to look at it. And then I guess what happened with Adjunct Commuter Weekly, it was very, very big, bigger than I had expected, really. I thought it would, well, let me rewind. One of the ways that my projects work is that I basically use these little publications to infiltrate bigger publications, and then you get this huge kind of distribution or publicity around a topic based on the big publication, you know, interviewing you or whatever. And so with Adjunct Commuter Weekly, I sort of imagined that would happen, but I thought it would happen at the level of art magazines, you know, so, you know, Art News, Art Forum, Freeze, things like that. And it did happen at that level, but then what happened was that it went to the next level of like the Wall Street Journal, the New Yorker, and those kind of just regular publications, which are obviously much bigger. And I was obviously very happy about that. I did a lot of interviews and worked around that publication, which was exactly what I dreamed of, but it also was very fatiguing in a particular way, which was that I had to play this role of the adjunct, which I was an adjunct, but, you know, playing the role was a kind of sad, you know, a kind of halo. I talked about like a halo formed around my head because, you know, I was this adjunct and I didn't make enough money, and I just sort of got tired of that position. And so one day I realized that I could take a less comfortable position, a less kind of halo forming position as a gentrifier, which, you know, in the US, it's more, I think it, you know, it obviously happens everywhere, but in the US, it's extremely, you know, racially organized, you know, so gentrification is largely white professionals moving into neighborhoods that working class people of color used to live in. And the midpoint, and the part that interests me artistically, was that artists usually operate as the kind of transition between the working class people of color and the white professional people. So to talk about myself as like participating in that process was like the opposite of adjunct, where adjunct is like, poor me, I'm so you know, having such a hard time. And to talk about yourself as a gentrifier is like a kind of complete shift. So that was the next project. Maybe before I go ahead, I'll note that International Slav is down there at the right. That's one of the ones that I dream of doing, which is a magazine for everything except national Slavs. So this is like a way of dealing with problems of identity in the Slavic world, which I know you're all experts in. But I'm going to jump ahead to the Daily Gentrifier. So again, here I'm trying to make a public. I'm trying to make artists see themselves in a way that they don't tend to see themselves, right? So, or they don't like to. So with Adjunct Commuter Weekly, professors don't like to see themselves as adjuncts because it's shameful. It's hard. It's hard to say I don't make enough money. I'm not a success professionally. That's shameful for, you know, good reasons. Being a gentrifier is also shameful for worse reasons, like I'm moving into a neighborhood. I don't really care who lives there. and I'm just going to be an artist and ignore all that, right? So a lot of artists don't want to see themselves as part of a real estate, you know, project or process. So this was kind of a different problem that I set out in terms of making this public. And when I was thinking about the publication, one of the first things that came to mind was this idea of the broadsheet, you know, which was this huge 22 by 30 inch piece of paper that was posted up in public in the early days of newspaper production. So I decided that that would be a good thing, would be to make a big, awkward, huge, you know, publication that would sort of show up and declare this problem. And I also used the kind of, I think the main idea was to use the aesthetics of gentrification, which normally kind of cover up what's going on. Like, you know, they just make it all seem very nice. Like there's nice typography and beautiful tile, and everything has a really nice name, you know, maybe from the 19th century, and everything is craft and organic and all these things. So I wanted to use all those, you know, kind of cover up aesthetics, but actually put the real content of what happens in gentrification, which is, you know, displacement. In the US, there's a lot of deportation and violence, police violence around deportation, you know, people losing their businesses and livelihoods, artists being kicked out, all that kind of stuff. So this was the first one I did was New York and LA. So this is the New York side, and then I put LA on the back. And I made it in this, what I called hyper artisanal way, which was that, let me go back. I knew I wanted to make it letterpress, which is just a very gentrifying print medium, because everything has to be like old fashioned and artisanal. But what I did was I actually wrote out the entire publication by hand. So it's not the best photo to see that, but I just decided like the craziest, most artisanal way to do a publication would be to draw the whole publication. So that drawing was scanned and made into a letterpress plate, which was pressed into this publication, so I debuted it in New York and then went to LA and did the normal thing of having a lot of events, contributors, everyone getting together and discussing like what gentrification is, and basically trying to make a small shift in how artists see themselves, and have them see themselves as people who could organize together with tenants, and be aware of the social impact of what they're doing, and take action. And again, I'm like using humor and artists themselves, I should also say, like, you know, a lot of the contributors are artists and critics, almost all of them. And so it's asking artists to think about this topic on their own terms is a big part of the process. So then I made a website for that. And that publication also collapsed after one episode or one edition because the rent was too high. So there's always a kind of baked in reason why the publication fails. But the next thing I wanted to do was to deal with smaller cities around the US. So in the US, the whole area between the coasts, you know, huge part of the country is called flyover country because people just fly over, right? So I decided to make a flyover flyer, and a flyer is like a small little thing, like a menu or, you know, like a punk thing that someone would give you on the street. So I just combined those two words and decided that I wanted to talk about how gentrification was happening in these smaller cities. I mean, Chicago's not very small, but some of the other cities are a little bit more on the medium-sized range. And what I saw living in Chicago and traveling to all these cities was there were different local variations on how this culturally driven gentrification was playing out. So I wanted to report on that. And I think another part of my motivation there was basically the collapse of cultural journalism in the US, and especially in flyover countries. So places that had an art writer for the local newspaper maybe 20 years ago, now they don't have that writer anymore. And it's interesting, even in Chicago, the Tribune, which is a huge paper, I think the third largest paper in the US, during the pandemic, furloughed all of its culture writers. So we don't have newspaper level culture writing at this point in any, except for New York and LA, which is obviously tragic. And there are bigger tragedies in the US, obviously, but this is, I think, huge and not unconnected to, the bigger cultural problems. So, part of the flyover flyers was to try to generate critical writing in each of these places and support it, in the small way that I could. So the first one I did actually was Columbus, Ohio, where my mother lives. I was invited by Joey Tang, a great curator who was at the Columbus College of Art and Design, to do the Columbus version. And my intention was to use the local aesthetic as much as possible to drive the design approach, of each flyover flyer. But the really difficult thing was like Columbus doesn't have a local aesthetic. It's like the most boring, bland, like neutral place. So the designer, Rye Wharton, and I talked a lot, and he finally came up with this mall map as a kind of aesthetic for the flyover flyer. And then he used, you can see on the right-hand image, those are all basically gentrifying condo projects that use old factories and things like that. And it writes out flyover flyer, or flyover, and the letters there. So we use this kind of aesthetic, and we base the whole publication on like a real estate pamphlet, like a glossy color real estate pamphlet. And then on the inside, I made this literary supplement because this writer named James Payne was actually working on a novella about gentrification, which is an amazing text. And so I printed that on this kind of horrible modeled like resume paper thing to kind of make this literary supplement. So, I mean, this is a great example of what happens when I do these publications, which is that James had been working on this novella, and no one was really that interested in it. But I came along, and he was so excited because he had been trying to talk about gentrification and try to address it. And so, he was able to publish an excerpt, and we're working on trying to publish the book. But that happens a lot, which is that, I talk to people in a city and they say, yeah, I've actually been, I've been photographing things, or, I have this essay, or you should talk to this professor because we've been discussing it. And it kind of helps to surface some of that material, which doesn't really have a platform in cultural journalism or in the commercial art gallery world, because those topics don't go over very well. So that's obviously part of my motivation. And then, this one we printed 500 copies, and you can see there's a big crowd came out. I was pretty nervous to go back to Columbus and talk about this because it's such a small city. Everybody knows each other, and I was worried that bringing up this kind of topic would be difficult for people, but it wasn't. It was, people were dying to talk about it and to think about their city and to think about how the arts should play a role and how the arts have played a role in the city. And the interesting and sort of sad thing about Columbus is, like, it's so extreme that the so-called arts district really doesn't have any arts in it. It's just like a real estate term. It's like where the art used to be, and now it's sort of, restaurants, which are fine, but it's really this idea of just using almost the idea or the phantom of art to push real estate projects. That's so insane and stupid. But yeah, so that's Daily Gentrifier, Columbus, and this is two of my collaborators there, holding the publication. I always like to take those photos. And then the next city that I worked on was Philadelphia. So here we used a completely different aesthetic of the zoning notices for Philadelphia because they were so striking and kind of beautiful. My designer, Aaron Gemmel, he was like, these are just gorgeous. So we decided actually to use the city of Philadelphia's zoning notices, you know, when they're starting a building project or stopping one. But instead of that content, we put in our own content. So at the top of this one is a poem about, there was this hospital that was closing, Hahnemann Hospital, that was being closed in Philadelphia. It was basically run badly, so it would collapse as a hospital and then could be turned into condominiums. So just this horrible, horrible, dark real estate policy in the US of turning a hospital, this is pre-pandemic, turning a hospital into expensive apartments for no reason except profit. So this was the zoning notice about that. Oh yeah, sorry. So that takes us back to the beginning. I thought I had one more image, but I don't. And I'll just say, like, the next thing I'm working on is taking the Daily Gentrifier international. So I'm probably going to be living in Europe next year, and I'm going to be doing the Daily Gentrifier Tallinn in Estonia for a show there in September. And then I'm also working on the Daily Gentrifier Kyiv, and probably also Berlin and London. So I'm kind of working on European cities and the dynamics that happen in Europe around gentrification. So I know that was a lot and very fast, but I just wanted to say a lot of things so you can choose what you want to talk more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Duško. It was a really nice presentation, and I had many associations already while listening. But maybe I should start with the end of your presentation. Would you think about the Daily Gentrifier in Belgrade? Because we're experiencing, we should discuss it, because the building where we have the exhibition at the moment is a building that might be used as a symbol for the future gentrification of the area. So that is something to consider, of course. But my practical question regarding the Daily Gentrifier was, what are the channels of the distribution?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for your Belgrade question, I would love to do that. I mean, it's so, the first thing I do is usually give some kind of talk like this, and then people start telling me stories like what you just started to do. And so that's, you know, super fascinating to me. Yeah, the distribution, it's funny. I mean, in a way, that's an ongoing question for me because it's totally unconventional. So usually I work with an organization in the city, right? So in Columbus, it was the Columbus College of Art and Design Gallery. And then in Philadelphia, it was Ksenia Noriel, who's the curator at the Print Center. So I like to do that because then the organization is somewhat implicated in like how they're navigating all this stuff. But also because then they have all these resources, connections, and everything like that. So I think basically using the local organization and then the contributors themselves, we work out like various modes of distribution. You know, it's a lot of the thing gets distributed at the event. So we try to give away as many as possible. And then we usually talk about like, can we put them in bookstores? What other galleries can we have? Can you give them to your friends? You know, the art world in any given place it's never very big, you know? So, you know, Columbus, we printed 500. I think that's probably all the art people in Columbus is 500 people. You know, I don't think there are more. I'm trying to get a little bit better about archiving these things online and making connections between the cities, you know, because that was part of my motivation, was for people in Columbus, Philadelphia, Belgrade, wherever, to sort of see how these things are developing in different places. So it's like you learn about the local problems, but then you also learn about how the whole pattern works, you know, kind of universally. So yeah, it's a partial answer, but yeah, I do have some things online, and we also paste them up in public too. So that's kind of part of the method. Yeah.
Regarding the flyover flyer, was it like falling from the sky? Did you distribute it by plane? That would be a nice idea, right? But not ecological one.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that. I don't know how I could get in a plane to do it, but that would be hilarious. The first one I did, I folded it into like a paper airplane shape, you know, just that was like when I thought of the joke. I just made a paper airplane, but I never used that idea. The other idea I had, you know, I like to take these kind of old-fashioned things that people think are not useful, you know, and one of them is the flyer, and try to figure out, like, is it actually powerful? So like where I teach, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is the biggest art school in the country, I think there are 1,000 faculty members, and that's a big percentage of all the artists in Chicago, really. You know, like, and there are these mailboxes that, you know, they're just sitting there, and that would like literally be this is pre-pandemic. That would be the easiest way to reach every artist in Chicago, would just be to put something in all of those mailboxes. So that's kind of the idea of the flyover flyer, is like, yeah, I haven't used the airdrop, but it's similar. Like, you know, you could go to the 4 art schools in a city and just put the flyer in each of those envelopes or each of those mailboxes. And then that's it. You've talked to like all the artists in the city, you know? So I try to use these like bizarre distribution methods in a way that's actually practical. But yeah, airdrop would be amazing.
Something to think about in the future, but when I looked at the aesthetics of the daily gentrifier, it reminded me of the Serbian, the only very specific avant-garde movement, which was called Zenitism.
Yeah.
That from the 1920s, like it's almost 100 years ago, but that was a way of trying to find channels to promote a political thought that was not mainstream. And basically, when I first encountered your publications in the American context, I was surprised because it had a European flair to it, not only aesthetically, but also from the point of view that the people that you involved, they reminded me of the independent scene, European independent scenes, which is a rare fact in the United States, where the mainstream institutions were so strong that you couldn't find many independent curators like Regina Basha that you involved in the book, or Alina Katsov, or there is Mary Jane Jacobs, but most of these people were super progressive thinkers, critical thinkers in a US context. And hearing them reading their answers in the book was interesting back in 2018. But what I find specifically interesting now, and it also refers to the title of your publishing house, like independent publishing house, the paper monument within the context of the digital turn. I mean, you're saving the paper, you're thinking about how to preserve the material. But from the point of view of 2020, all these questions that you raised are now the burning questions, so that you raised in a book. And I would refer to some of them. For example, one of the curators was talking that you choose as your interlocutor for the book he mentioned radical inclusivity. And in 2020, we really try, like with the Black Lives Matters and all different kinds of inclusivity that has been stressed with the COVID crisis, and who gets the chance to get in and who remains out. And like to raise that question, it seems that you were, it was like, it was as if your independent publishing house managed to trace something that was yet about to come. And I think that's amazing, because now it reads totally differently. Do you have an angle on that? Because also another theme was ethnicity as a counterculture. I mean, Black Lives Matter and all other ethnicities that whose voices have been raised in 2020. So this critical angle of the new institution of art that you raised.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a very thoughtful consideration of the book. I'll just make a brief comment about the first thing you said about the kind of European style. It's funny because whenever I go to Europe, my wife Magdalena Moskalewicz is Polish and a well-known curator and everything, so we go back and forth a lot. So whenever I give a talk in Europe, I have to explain the American context, but not my approach so much, because a lot of times the approach is like totally normal for European artists. Or like I was at VHV in Zagreb, and the students there are like, yes, I understand the approach, like I'm totally normal. But the context you have to explain is like, the context in the US is so hyper commercial that to do this in the US is like kind of insane, so that's this funny, my personal identity is like messy there. And I often think that I'm like doing European style art in the US. And part of my anxiety about coming Tallinn, Kyiv, maybe Belgrade is like, how does it work when you're back in Europe? So I don't know. Your point about like that we managed to kind of predict some of the things that were going to be more urgent now. I mean, I can't really take that much credit for it, except to say that we just believe in asking people who are really involved in a situation to say what they actually feel, like we really, that's the main thing that we push for. And a lot of publications don't do that. They really have like an idea that they want, and then they tell you, write about this, right? But we say like Ken Chen was running the Asian American Writers Workshop, and was like, Ken, what are you thinking about? What is the main thing that's important to you? And Ken was like, thank you for asking me, because nobody asked me for like my way of seeing this. And he wrote that great essay that you referenced, Ethnicity as Counterculture, which you're right. Like now it's like, Ken and all the people he was working with had been thinking about that, for decades. So, I mean, I think that's the only method. And it's funny because we often feel like we're behind. Like that's the joke of Paper Monument. Like we're behind, we're too slow. But the faith that we have is that if you go a little bit deeper, then these questions will come forward. And we did talk to a lot of, it's funny, we ended up talking to independent curators. Partly that comes from the fact that a lot of institutional curators, even if they personally wanted to write for the book, they couldn't professionally write for the book. So a lot of people said, I would love to talk, but I can't. And I look forward to seeing your book, or, I started my essay, I had to talk to the legal department. And now I'm not going to continue the essay, or, there's variations. So it's like, I mean, it's not state censorship, but there's some sort of like boss censorship types of things, both in terms of who ended up being included in the book and the kind of writing. You can kind of read in between the lines a little bit with people, and again, we did the thing where we obviously wanted to get the truth and to have people be as upfront as possible. And I mean, that's the funny thing about curators. I've done projects like this with editors. Editors and curators are sort of similar in the sense that they're normally sort of invisible, and they sort of like that. Like you only hear about an editor when something goes wrong. But we did feel like it would be really good to talk to them and to ask them to come forward, right? Like to not be back organizing things, but to come forward and say what you think, and I think a lot of the curators really appreciated that, as difficult as it was for them.
Yeah, but the fact is that these people who are not in main institutions, they are the big names. All of them are known for their authorship as curators, but I think they were much closer to the reality of life, and that's why they were capable of voicing the change that was about to come in 2020. And so now the book reads differently. And also, I would say that this in 2015, people predicted the alter institutional turn. That the time when the other institution of art, a more responsible, a more ethical institution of art will appear. And then there was your book in 2018, and you can kind of it anticipated all these things. It was written down, like written in stone, basically. And then in 2020, you see that these people who were closer to the people, let's say, they are the ones capable of leading the institution of today. This alter institutional turn happened because it seems to me that these big institutions, they were high up, so now the fall is greater because they were never close to the people. So, but those people who were down all the time, down to earth, so to say, they can cope with the crisis. So I think that it grows like wine, like wine. It gets better with time. So your book. So I think it is a valuable resource, and that many positions could be mapped out in that book. So. And I hope that we will live in a better society where we will not fight gentrification. But for the moment, we are strongly fighting it in Belgrade. So your contribution would be valuable as long as we find ways to collaborate. But I was also curious about the International Slav. 10 years ago, we have invited within a project Slavs and Tatars, but
Yeah.
Slavs and Tatars, they made they were in Serbia 10 years ago, but the International Slav, that's something different. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it is different. I love Slavs and Tatars, and I know them, but yeah, the idea with the International Slav, it's funny actually because it started before my family discovered me, so it's kind of an interesting shift that happened. But the basic idea was, um, like whatever Slavic nationalism is, to do the opposite, and Slavs and Tatars do this too, where it's to look at the Slavic world not as this monolithic, unified thing, but to really look at all the ways the difference happens and that kind of thing. So that's part of my interest. I grew up in Ecuador. My father was Serbian. So I grew up in a diaspora, multicultural place. Nobody ever thinks I'm from Ecuador. And so in a way, I've been thinking about this kind of problem my whole life. And only recently did I sort of connect it with basically like a global political problem, which is that, and we feel this even in the US, like the Slavic world is weirdly kind of a liminal world in terms of whiteness and in terms of identity, where, the Slavic world could choose to identify with, as it did in its, in its past at various times, with the kind of non-aligned or, more oppressed parts of the world. Or it could do this thing of being like a kind of, I don't know, second level white group that's more angry and more, the kind of Putin model or whatever, this kind of horrible, macho, aggressive, fascist nationalism, Slavicness model, right? A way of dealing with our status. So International Slav is like a kind of bizarre intervention where I wanted to produce basically a big glossy magazine about international Slavs and everything about the Slavic world that could be glamorous, that could be celebrated, that is not nationalism, because there's so much that's wonderful and beautiful and, amazing and that could be featured in a glossy magazine. So that's what I thought of as International has this kind of glamorous kind of side to it. So I just decided to use that kind of glossy, exciting thing to fight, you know, what I think is a very horrible, small-minded kind of Slavic nationalism that I've obviously, you know, is so destructive and sad. But yeah. So, and I have a, like, my personal take on it was that because I didn't have my family, I was cut off from my father, I didn't have a family, I kind of assembled this weird surrogate family of all these people from the Slavic world. And that was really exciting. But Magda, we talk about this project all the time. She has a different position on it, being like Polish, and but also wants to do it because I just think it would be really fun. So yeah, my dream is really to have it be, I don't know if you're supposed to say these things out loud, but my dream is to have it be one of the national pavilions in Venice, and we just run the magazine out of the pavilion and completely like internationalize whatever the national pavilion is, and have it be like a space where all people, you know, Roma, Jews, LGBTQ, mixed people, you know, most of my family is also mixed. Like, I mean, I'm mixed Serbian Ecuadorian, which is like, there's only two, there's me and my brother, Uroš. We're like the only two of that vintage, you know, but also like Serbian Croatian, like Serbian Slovenian, like there's so many people that are mixed, that are, you know, all this kind of stuff that I think would be so exciting to talk about international Slav. So there was this I'll end with one last joke. There was this Montenegrin doorman that I was friends with in New York. And he used to say, it's kind of a sad joke, but he used to say, I used to speak one language, now I speak six, you know, because he was like joking about all the former Yugo languages. And he would show me the packaging, you know, it'd be like all the languages saying the same thing. And he's like, I speak 6 languages now. It's amazing, you know?
Yeah.
So anyways, I don't mean to be joke also about something that's
no, we are resilient. I mean, regarding all these nationalist topics. But the thing is that Noam Chomsky also had the remark that immigrants from Eastern Europe were very welcome into the States because they were white, but still most of them were the labor force. And they had a high, because of the socialism and communism, they had this strong sense of personal hygiene and good medical records, because they were taking care in that sense. So there's a harsh reality of the immigrants, not those who went through Ecuador, that's another story, but those who are the white people who are basically better than the black people or the people of color. They're just the same labor force, but they're colored differently. So, but I think we're in 2020, we can remember these issues, but I hope that in the future they will not be issues. Although it might sound utopian, right?
Yeah, and I'm talking to you from Chicago, which I think is probably the second biggest Serbian city in the world, and it's totally racially segregated, and that's exactly what you describe is what happened. And you know, the category of whiteness was expanded to include the Irish, you know, Germans, Irish, Slavs, and everything like that. But it's a kind of ongoing thing. And I think, you know, that's a big question, I think, for the Slavic world generally, is like, you know, everybody talks about it like sort of EU or Russia, like, and I just wish there were more choices, you know, and I think, you know, the non-aligned world, the global South, and, you know, communities within the Slavic world are really, you know, we could show solidarity with those groups too. You know, there's like a choice there. So yeah.
But there's the fact that this Zenithism group, the avant-garde movement, they were the international Slavs back then. So hundreds of years later, maybe that's something to rethink, or to use some of the Cyrillic fonts that they used for the daily gentrifier. But just to go back to the fact that I'm amazed that the cultural journalism collapsed in the States. I mean, in the flyover territories. And I don't know how you're going. Do you have any, like, what are the channels of the distribution? Do you refer to LA and New York and that's it? Like, what's happening with the cultural journalism? Because you teach new arts journalism. What would be the future channels for it? Social media?
Yeah, it's a very interesting problem. I don't have the answer, but my kind of sketch of the problem is that there are more opportunities, and there's been a lot of great writing, critical writing, creative writing, because there's been so much freedom. But there's no money, so nothing is sustainable, nothing is long term, and projects that require, you know, long-term expertise or week by week reporting or those kind of resources just don't happen. So, you know, in terms of like the state of criticism in a lot of ways is has been improved. Like there are more voices, there's more focuses, people get into really specific things, you know, like the internet has just made all of that possible. But in terms of like supporting those people, it's just very, very hard. I mean, you know, I think there should be more public funding of journalism in the US. I think we're going to have to find our way toward things like that. I think that some of the kind of crowdfunding models are interesting and might have some potential, like Patreon and Kickstarter and these things where you pay $10 a month or something and you help support someone. You know, I listen to the Dig podcast. It's a great podcast and they run on Patreon. So that's wonderful. I think also that there, what was I going to say? So there's crowdfunding, public funding. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wonder, you know, whether the newspaper model or this kind of civic model, whether it will actually survive, you know. But I really believe in it. I believe that art should not just be for artists in the art world, but it should be for you know, the citizens generally. So I think it's a huge, huge question. I guess one of the bright spots financially has been podcasting, but it's not clear to me that that can really work very well for visual arts and things in the visual arts. So yeah, I think it's a big question. And part of the problem in the US, I think probably it's happening in other places, but I follow it in the US, is that like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times have basically sucked up all the resources and the staff because they're viable. And so that's been really detrimental to the rest of the country, because there just isn't like the local reporting. Forget about art. There's not the local political reporting and those kinds of things, because, you know, I live in Chicago, but the truth is I read the New York Times, you know, 100 times more than I read the Chicago Tribune, because it's just a much better paper. But that's sad for, you know, for Chicago and for, you know, for the local news here. So I think that's a big problem. So, you know, the New York Times is growing and surviving and producing all these amazing things. But if you go to smaller cities, Detroit, St. Louis, whatever, the newspapers are really in trouble, you know.
Well, yeah, many things to deal with, but we will adjust, I can say. I would like to ask people if they have any questions, and they could raise a hand and say something. If not, I have one more question before we close. Or you can type the question in the comments or the chat. Yeah, but no matter the crisis, you're dealing with it creatively. And yeah, that's wonderful to hear that that you're adjusting with your practice and the publishing house. And I'm glad that we were able to share your voice within this local context. And I hope this is just the start of many different collaborations. But what I wanted to stress, because it was the title of this talk, it's the difference between the publics and the audience. And do you have your own angle on that? Or because publics would be considered as active, critically engaged, politically significant, and audience is what's much wider. So maybe the things that are happening at this time are good for the publics, because they will like the content will be focused for the publics that really need it, because the audience otherwise would be the audience is the mediascape at large. It covers a very vast spectrum, so people cannot mobilize easily. But do you have your own angle on the definition between publics and the audiences?
I mean, yeah, I guess if I wanted to try to say something big about it, I would almost say that almost the most important decision or thing that an art can do is to make an audience or to make a public, and because it's like how the art speaks to you or what the art expects from you, you know. And if it expects you to be like passive and an observer or a consumer, or if it sort of pushes you in that direction, then that's what art is doing in that culture, is it's like creating that kind of person. And, you know, that's obviously the main thing in the US. And I think that, you know, if an art wants to make you into a public, like you were saying, like a critical, engaged, active viewer who wants to participate in culture and civil society, you know, and the big questions of one's time, I think that's really the best thing art can do, is actually orient us toward that kind of behavior. You know, it's funny, another maybe way of saying this, Mladen Stojinović came to New York and said, like, I think he must say it everywhere, but he says there's two kinds of art. There's cake art and potato art. And he said, like, New York is just like cake art, like all of it's cake art. And he said that, and it just hit me like so hard. Like, it was so simple, but it was so true. Like, it's so much cake. Like, there's just, and I love, you know, cake is fine, but like, you know, you do need the potatoes. and it was funny because after his talk, then we went outside, and the stairway to the next part of the talk, to the party, there were pieces of cake on each stair. So it was like a wonderful Mladen Stojinović piece. But yeah, I guess I'm not always saying I'm for potatoes, but I think that in the US especially, there could be so much more art that's really trying to make a public and not an audience, you know, like, but obviously, like, the main incentive here is money. So it's a lot of kind of audience. Even people talk about like building your audience, like online with social media and things like that. It's so.
But do you think it could be built or motivated? That's the difference. In
terms of a public?
Yeah, the audiences. You can build, like, you can manipulate them, right? But
exactly.
You cannot.
Like, I think an audience is basically fascist. It's like capitalist, fascist, like kind of public. You know, like they're ready to be like swayed and things like that. I mean, I'm not a political scientist, obviously, but you know, my sense, especially within the art world and what artists could do. What good artists already do is to make a public. Like, you know, it's not like it was my idea or anything, but I'm just on that side, you know.
I agree totally. Like, good artists, they inspire you. They are inspirational. They make you know things and they influence things, and yeah. So they make you think. But just one question for the end. Why did you mention salad in the title of the book?
Oh, that came from... it's sad because I don't remember the name of the contributor off the top of my head, but one of the contributions said like a big choice of what an art institution could be. And they used those four, and we just thought those four were great. Yeah, so I don't know why salad was included. It reminds me of, now I'm forgetting her name too, the great, there's a great conceptual piece that involves making a salad. It's the same woman that does Identical Lunch, and I'm blanking on her name. But anyways, that's what I always think of with the salad. I think it also had the sense of like just putting a bunch of things together and mixing it up. I don't know, but we like that. Yeah.
I hope it will be more radical than a salad, the institution of tomorrow.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, As Radical was the first one, so I think the emphasis is on that. It's funny because we call the book, we always call it something shorter because the title is so long. So we call it, sometimes we call it Radical Salad, and sometimes we call it Salad Mother.
Salad Mother.
Yeah.
But 2020 is the year to call it the shelter. Like the art
shelter.
institution is a shelter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got it. You got it all covered up, like the full spectrum.
We tried.
Okay, Duško, thank you.
Thanks so much.
I enjoyed it. I hope the public enjoyed it, not the audience. Our public, we try to generate people who think and who will become influential and work for a better society in the future.
Yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing there.
Thank you. It's my responsibility, but I do enjoy it. It is challenging, but I do enjoy it. So
good.
Okay, thank you for your wholehearted support, and until we meet again.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Have a nice
Bye.
evening.
People say nice to have you here. So
thank
regards
you.
from your new Serbian public.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.